Draft physics video. Doing some of the the preliminaries of the laser experiment anyway, going out that window. It's kind of neat from the target. You can actually see the laser, which is pretty good. So I got it on a little tripod. I have to make an electronic switch for this, and well, I have to just splice a couple of wires. Anyway, so I figure it's because it's wet out, you can kind of see the beam, which is kind of neat. And it doesn't spread as much as I thought, diverge, and it does magnify any kind of defect you put in front of the laser, which is sort of interesting. All right, well, you can't see it too much there. I don't think you can see it all there, so you have to kind of be on the other side of it. So I can barely see it on the side of a tree over there. Just walked through the beam, but you should be able to see it. Yeah, you should be able to see this. Take this thing off, see if you can see that. I don't know, it's quite clear to me. Can you see that? I think you can see that. Yeah, I think the line is there. Green line right here. So, kind of neat. Yeah, pretty cool. Should shine it right into the camera and see what happens, right? Yeah, that would be a cool experiment. So that part's pretty neat. So let's go find it out here on the tree and see where it is angular-wise. Put the lens back on. So I intend to talk about some of the two-slit experiment, really. This is just, like I said, for the purpose of, I have to walk around all this crap. So anyway, this will be fun. The next few weeks I can do this bullshit and get Lyme disease again. Hey, a cardinal. It's kind of a nice bird for the woods. And big giant woodpeckers have been around. So maybe I can find a tree even further away, put a mirror on. See, I thought it was hitting a bigger tree. It's only hitting a little tiny tree. But I can always put a target out here. This is an interesting hole. Yeah, that is really cool. You see that? Never really saw it rot on the inside like that. Tree looks almost dead though. Oh, it's gone. Where's the beam? I lost it. It was right here. Oh, there it is. It's hiding. This water shouldn't be here. Anyway. Yeah, I kind of thought I was hitting that tree, and I'm barely hitting it. I ended up hitting this little one. But really, that isn't terrible. 2 inches at about 300 feet, something like that. Yeah, I'd say 100 yards. So you can really see that beam quite well. Let's take this off. Should be able to see that anyway. I didn't think it would show up that good. So, very visible. So it'd be nice if I had maybe I will go down the park and find a clear field and see if I don't get arrested for doing some kind of evil experiment. But, then I should be able to shoot it, 500 feet easy. Maybe 1,000. Anyway, so I might be able to get through here. Yeah, so this looks like a path. So if I cut these weeds out of here, I should get a bit further. Let's see if I hit that big tree. That's about the last good big tree to cut in there. And then I'm getting close to the neighbors over there. Might not want me cutting in their woods. But anyway, worth doing. Mostly. So anyway, so yeah, the commenters and people who want to say my alternative theory is nothing or crazy or doesn't make sense or any of that crap. It's just useless. The fact is that it does explain the phenomenon, and that's what you're supposed to be after, is an explanation. You're supposed to be. God, getting too old. I want like the wheelchair friendly path. I don't know what this shit is. it's on the other side of the trench. This is one of my contemplating chairs. Back in the day when I contemplated looking over the trench. Probably should put it someplace else. More contemplatory. So, yeah, so you can see that pretty well. I like it. Interesting. So I'll be able to see, you know, maybe different kind of weather, what kind of beam effects you get. So, another good experiment. Lots of subjects this whole, I want to try polarizing the beam also. Different ways of doing, you know, the whole booster angle thing. Yeah. So I'm figuring you get light more in phase likely. Because of my theory of polarization anyway, you're selecting polarizations and a little different. So anyway, doable. You know, I'll put a mirror out there and bounce it back. Double doable. Okay, turn that off. Alright. So back to the regularly scheduled video presentation. I would edit it, but I don't feel like gluing the videos together. If it goes over a half an hour, it's a big hassle. So I usually go over a half an hour. So I don't want the big hassle. Oh, crappy rain today, and weather's cold, and might as well do some gardening videos though. Greenhouse is doing very well. Yeah, I'll do gardening on the draft physics video. Just to point out, I haven't been doing nothing. I have to do all this work. I've been just selling the property and blah blah blah, and I have to keep up with the garden. See, look at it in there, very nice. Lots of stuff growing. But the weather's been suck. May has been suck. And it's going to get worse this week. It's all cold and not good. Can't plant anything in the ground. It's going to be too cold. Everything get killed. Or stunted or ruined. Degraded in some manner. See? If we end up with a frost this week, all that shit's in trouble. Anyway. I think it's enough. Cat is a little desperate to get in. Cats don't like this kind of weather. Nope. Keep going to the door expecting it to get better. But I mean, I really wanted to plant my tomatoes, but I can't. So it's going to get too cold. And they'll ruin them, mostly. Hey, get in your chair. Alright, now to continue. So, it's mostly going to be double slit stuff, I think. So I did make myself a little cheap double slit toy thing, but I gotta get better light sources. I'm gonna try some. I have this ultraviolet flashlight stuff, and I actually bought some LEDs, ultraviolet, and it's kind of neat how Chinese paper really glows. See that paper down there? It's Chinese paper. Really glows. Anything from China glows. Mostly. So I did make myself this little, you know, for the purpose of double slitting. And oh, I forgot my browser crashed. Well, it didn't crash, the Internet Explorer crashed. But anyway, I did take some photos of the actual slits, which is kind of good for me. So it's paper, but and it doesn't even look slippery, but it has this almost plastic look. But you know, it's not a perfect edge here, so I'm going to try to just rub another piece of paper against the edges, see if I can get cleaner edges. But it's about 1 millimeter thick barrier, so the slits are about, you know, much less than half to start with, but they're adjustable, see, so I can move them, make them wider and such. So I'll try it with I might try the red laser because it seems to work a little better than the good green one, but we'll see how that goes. So I'm working on it, is the point. So the thing I really wanted to talk about though is, you know, people's snarky remarks that are just so useless. I mean, they just provoke anger and pisses me off, and you know. And I know you think I'm guilty of some crime because what I have done, in the sense of saying I think Einstein was incorrect. I don't think it's a correct theory of the force of gravity. I don't think it's created by a magical bent anything. I think it's an actual force. I think magnetism is an actual force. It doesn't create virtual photons. It creates actual force tons, whatever you want to call them. Tons. They're just not as detectable as light, or they're what we traditionally call part of the electromagnetic spectrum. But they exist, and the same tons are the ones responsible for gravity. And because they're not typical electron-based tons, well, they are sort of. I mean, quite obviously in magnetism they affect electrons quite dramatically. see, I mean, all they do is they're not affect them the way you're used to, which is the electron creates another ton, a photon, something you can see. And if you can't see it, then you're going to claim it doesn't exist, and it's just not very bright. So, I don't know, I should get to this Jesse guy first, but, I mean, I really shouldn't get to him first, actually, because the marbles guy is more relevant to this subject at the moment. Well, his comments are older, so I might as well get to it. More relevant to this idea of blocking this part of the slit, and, you know, what these people think the pattern should be. So he quotes me saying, you would expect the movie to show up here just smaller, and it would show up here bigger, and anyway, especially with photons, because their wavelength is so small, the interference will start happening at a millimeter from the slits. So my argument is, see, you know, what he's not getting is I don't think his theory has any explanation for his own experimental results. The idea is, so let's understand that this always has to be applicable to one photon at a time going through. So let's understand that the theory is that one photon comes to the slits, okay, it's Huygens, which means it's turned into these flat waves, this flat photon, let's call it a flat photon for whatever purpose, but a flat photon comes towards the slits, and apparently the ones that hit the middle aren't affected by this rule, but anyway, the ones that go through the slit, they go through both the slits, create round waves, alright, and that the round waves create an interference pattern. So if I can draw it reasonably correct, so everybody, we know this part, right? And we know that the interference pattern will be basically, if I just drew it as this being an arc, it would be this, okay? Dark spots will show up and between the light spots. So peak bright, peak dark, peak bright, peak dark, peak, so, you know, sine wave, however you want to draw it. Peaks and valley and peaks and valley. So that's what it's going to do. It's going to create this fan. Now he puts a barrier in here, and my argument is this wavelength is so small, the distance between these Huygens waves is so small, that by the time you get just centimeters away, you already have, this pattern has already developed. This fan has already been created. And so all you're really doing if you move the screen is you're just changing where it gets displayed. So a screen far away, the bands are far apart. A screen close, the bands are closer together. That's the difference. Now, somewhere in here there's some communication problem, I guess. I was thinking the same thing, but that's completely wrong. I took a pic just during the night. Okay, the camera is really bad and does not represent what I saw with my own eyes, but this is the best I could do just from today. I redid it again. This sounds like the old comment. I thought I dealt with this one. But anyway, so here's, maybe this one was done a day later, so maybe we'll deal with this one. Let's get another thing straight. Longer wavelength equals more diffraction. Now that's where I'll disagree. So let's say that the wavelength is longer, all it really means is that the places where there'll be interference will be further apart, so the bands will be different. So the bright and dark spots will be wider. So if blue light, the dark bands and light bands will be closer together. But what's really interesting is this distance, the distance of what's visible. So if we said the visible pattern is this wide, that always seems to be consistent. So no matter what, so if you had blue, you'd get more dots inside of that absolute pattern, and with red, you'd get fewer on-offs, but it's always going to end up being within this context, this distance, and it always seems to fade at the same point. Fade visibly. That's why I'd like somebody to do this with photographic film and see if there's actually anything happening on those fringes, you know, beyond the visible pattern. So anyway, all right, less spreading. So, you know, the lower the wavelength, I mean, the bigger the wavelength, the less, see, the shorter the wavelength equals less spreading. But I mean, it's not less diffraction. It's the same amount of diffraction, just happens at a different point. That's why two beams don't mix until they travel a few centimeters. Okay, that's your claim. So you're saying a few centimeters. So you're saying that at some point, if I go closer, see, the problem is that if you go closer to the two slits, so let's say this is the two slits here. If you go really close, the pattern hasn't diverged, obviously, so it's really, really small, and you can't see it, theoretically. That's always been the problem. But I mean, it's always there. No matter what distance you go to, you'll find the pattern. So I don't think anyone's demonstrated your argument that at, say, 3 centimeters, there's no pattern. Another thing I think is interesting, at least I've been finding every time I play around with this stuff, is the fact that the images are reversed. So there is this lensing idea is actually happening somewhere, you know, where the pattern is getting, you know, this arrow ends up being duplicated, like reversed. So that's happening, and I don't exactly know why, because there shouldn't be a focal length. So this would be the the focal length, but the beam diverges so little, I don't understand why there would be a focal length, the actual beam. I'm saying the fact that the light spreads, yes, from being bent, but once it's bent, it shouldn't be lensing. It shouldn't be crossing over. So that part's a little hard to understand. But it also makes it interesting in terms of another factor to consider is that if something diffracts this way and you're actually seeing it on the other side, so the image is backwards. But I don't know how that focal length could be at the target, but it would have to be at the target. But it might be creating a focal length. That's why apertures are called lenses. That's why it's called lensing. But anyway, it is interesting. Alright, just by the fact that I blocked one of the beams and the double slit pattern is not appearing shows that the interference pattern does not come from the slits. So this simple, instead of showing his drawings, what he's, this is sort of the pattern he displays, the double slit pattern. So basically gets it correct. Lines, 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 lines. So it goes from light to dark, and then there's lines inside of it. So he's getting this pattern correctly. So he's getting a traditional double slit pattern. And then when he blocks, okay, by putting a barrier halfway across this fan, so halfway across he puts a barrier, he gets instead just the single slit pattern. The single slit for a small aperture. a small opening, which by what he says how wide his slits are, which is more than a ½ millimeter, he should have a pretty, he should have bars in the single slit pattern. He should have a single slit pattern that looks more like this. Well, let's do it right. You know, the bar, dots, lots of dots. So anyway, but we'll have to see about that when we do the experiment. But my argument is theoretically, you know, he's saying that if he blocks it here early, that he takes the bars out of the pattern. And I'm not disputing that doesn't happen. I'm just saying, what's your Huygens explanation for that? Because I don't think that makes sense from a distance perspective, because there should already be this slit should already interfere with this slit at whatever the distance apart this barrier is, essentially. That sort of dictates. So at twice the distance of this barrier, so at less than 2 millimeters, I mean tenths of a millimeter. Well, this is, let's say this is a millimeter. So yeah, so 2 millimeters would be the maximum. I'm just trying to think of how many times you have, how far out you have to go before you've created these wavelets that are going to interfere with each other. But I'm just saying, draw me that Huygens picture. I mean, I could go back to just doing 2 slit images, which I suppose wouldn't hurt, but you know, the traditional pattern. But I'm just saying the fan idea is established early. That's all I'm saying. Okay, appearing to show, let's see, double slit pattern is not shows, so he puts that in capital, that the interference pattern does not come from the slits. So again, what would be the argument if it didn't come from the slits? In the sense that it's, obviously it comes from the slits, I would argue. But by you're claiming that you can change the pattern by at a distance changing. So if you move it, if you move your block, your screen, say 10 centimeters away, does it still destroy the pattern? The argument I'm going to make is the little bar pattern is a subtle pattern, and that one's wiped out easily. That's, you know, the just like in a interferometer. Doesn't take much alteration of the experiment to screw with that, and so maybe you're not seeing it because its focal length isn't right now. It has to be at the right distance. I don't know. I have to, like I said, well, I have to do the experiment because you have to vary things and find out what's causing the effect. All right, the Huygens principle was guessed as a principle only in a historical context. I don't even know what that means. You know, only in historical context. It's you know. Oh, you mean that's how it originated? Oh. Later on, people like Kirchhoff and friends, whatever that is, found out that you can derive this from the wave equations as a mathematical consequence. We'll go ahead and do that with a water wave. So you're saying the wave equations contain Huygens built into them. The argument is, if I take 2 slits in water, I don't get this pattern. I just get bars. Bar, 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 bar. That's all I get. And they just get dimmer as you go farther away. So the distance between them remains the same, except obviously if you're against a flat surface. So if you're taking a pattern going against a flat surface, obviously these distances change, so this one will be spread. So unless if you don't curve the surface you're projecting it on, you won't get equal proportions. But so you will get some lengthening of the distance between the light and dark the further away you go. But the point is the water wave math is just a diminishing pattern. It gets weaker and weaker as it goes further away, but these distances, at least in the curve, would remain the same. So it's not like this pattern. So you're saying you can derive this pattern is somehow built into wave, a derivation of wave mechanics comes up with that. Well, I don't think it does. Alright, you don't even know what the wave equation is. Well, yeah, I know it's just this stupid thing where you take the distance. So you can keep saying, I don't know. That's your prerogative. It's not my expertise, but I can follow along enough to say the sine of theta, the angle of difference, I know that stuff, and it's really all just calculated based on the distances. So the width of the slit, the distance to the target, there's not all that much in there, and the wavelength of the light. So what are you saying I don't understand, asshole? I know it's made out of simple variables. There's no trick variable. There's no Huygens factor in the mathematics. So you can keep claiming Huygens has something to do with the mathematics. Huygens has something to do with before you do the mathematics. It has to do with that sine theta. Fuckhead. It has to do with the fact that you made 2 photons out of 1 photon. 1 photon goes in. 2 things come out. That's Huygens. Alright? That's not math. That's making something. That's creating a premise to the creation of these 2 entities that have spherical wave function. So all of a sudden now light is a single point source radiating in all directions. A photon is. That's Huygens. So I don't think you understand the difference between the conceptual premises that underlie formulas. That first you have to accept where the sine theta comes from. The theta. Alright, so what the fuck makes you think you have any privilege to call any of this contrived? Well, I already explained what gives me the authority. The authority comes from the fact that every single popular physics video, every single video accessible on the internet, mischaracterizes this pattern and the mathematics that constructs their prediction of it, of the wrong pattern. They predict this pattern. They predict the water wave pattern. They don't predict the light pattern. Every single video. You can't take me to a video on the internet that demonstrates otherwise. You instead had to sit there and cut and paste your little crappy math where we do one formula and then we do a second formula to fix our first formula. But there's no formula. You don't have a formula that does it right. And you certainly don't have a single video you can point me to where a qualified physics person, a degreed physicist, is true to the facts. Show me the video that explains the 2-slit experiment true to the facts. This is your claimed nail-in-the-coffin evidence, and yet this nail-in-the-coffin evidence, this so clear it's you know, glass. You can see right through it. How this is perfect. This makes it all visible. And yet they can't honestly describe it. And I'll say honestly. Let's just say they can't accurately describe the experiment to save their fucking lives. If I force them to honestly describe it, they can't do it. Because whatever crap they come up for the 2-slit experiment, it's going to fuck up the 1-slit experiment. So no matter, and then if I get them to honestly describe the single-slit experiment, they'll fuck up the double-slit experiment. Because you can't apply the same rules to both experiments. And I've already pointed that out. And I pointed out physicists doing exactly that. Just changing the rules. 2 slits, well, then we'll just think of them as 2 single-point sources. 1 slit, well, we'll think of it as infinite number of point sources. I mean, I've pointed it out. You won't concede the point, so what's the argument? I'm not going to argue with you. I'm going to argue with what your conventional physics that you're defending is saying. So why don't you tell them to say it right? Why don't you tell the physics professors to say it right? Instead of telling me I'm wrong. Tell them to say it right first, asshole. Just run the fucking wave equations. You don't even need Huygens there. Liar. The wave equation will not get you this. It will get you this. So right there is just a grotesque lie. The math won't show you what the two-slit experiment does with light. And that I've already demonstrated by showing the math and showing the pattern it creates. And it doesn't in any way account for this inside the single slit pattern. Without Huygens, it has no chance. Again, what's your theory? Let's say it's not Huygens to create... See, that's the trick they use. They claim that one photon, to go through the two-slit experiment, one photon comes in and something splits in two, but it's not Huygens. Well, see, we know in water what's happening. Okay, we know the water wave is one big wave. It breaks into two pieces. Okay, and the individual pieces experience friction, which I don't think anybody would think light has, and that's what bulges the wave. That's what turns the flat wave into a bulged wave. We know it's friction. Do you think it's something else that bulges the wave? It's under tension. There's friction. The one piece is moving slower than the other pieces, and it bends. Is there some other truth when it happens in water waves? So what's your physical explanation? I mean, you keep pointing to this math. Well, your math has to have a physical explanation to go with it. You have to be able to draw a diagram of how this happens. What's your theory of how it happens? I don't care if you just call it the magic force, but you have to account for what happens. The single photon turns into two things. The two things turn into bulge waves, and yet the wave equation won't get you the right pattern. It won't do this. Water waves don't do that. Alright. Just run the fucking wave equation. Again, no. Show me. Alright, talking about the wrench and laser is just going to detract from everything, but we'll see. Well, again, they're two important subjects, so, you can't handle that in a separate comment. I'm sorry. But, yeah, I'm going to keep bringing it up until you come up with the reason the two have your duplicity of saying, well, yes, photons have mass and they can move in two directions, just like a wrench in space, and then, but somehow the wrench, if the guy misses it, it goes away at a higher speed, and somehow the photon doesn't. Once it leaves the frame. They are both handled the same way by the velocity addition formulas, though. They can't be. It's impossible for you to handle them the same way because of the vector math. So it's just a lie to say they're handled the same way. The vector math says that the wrench has two velocities, okay, x and y. And when you add them up, okay, you're going to get a hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse is the new velocity. That's going to be the new velocity. So the velocity this way and the velocity this way will add up to this hypotenuse of the new velocity. So this line will be longer than this line, and it'll be longer than this line. But it'll be a lot less than these two lines added up. And that's the velocity the wrench moves at. That's its real velocity. So, to tell me they are both handled the same way by the velocity addition formulas, though. No, they're not. So that's just a lie. I mean, that's just nonsense. Because clearly the photon, in your opinion, doesn't leave faster than any of the two velocities. God damn it. This over and over again. Alright, so this asshole, Jesse Pincuman. Anyway, so he posted a link to this stupid MEEP crap from MIT, right? I'm not loading it on my computer. But anyway, this visualization software based on formulas that are still incomplete. So what's the point? I mean, first, the idea of MIT not being able to make software that is convertible to web applications, that is, that could actually just play in browsers. I mean, the fact that they can't convert it to Flash or they can't convert it into just images is pretty idiotic. I mean, it's pretty lame for a college, a scientific college. You think they have enough computer scientists to know how to write the software on platforms that exist on the internet? So that's my first critique. But again, what's the point when you see what their math is doing? So I'm just saying, why can't you use your MEP software and just show me the image? Show me the image of them putting the numbers in. The slits, the two slits are a 0.5 millimeter thick. The single pen pediment's a millimeter thick. And this is the two slit pattern you get. And there's this many bars in it. And why can't you tell me all that? Why can't you just use the software and then show me the image they produce for you, if it's so brilliant? Oh, that's right, but you can't do any of that. That's why. This is just, I don't even know, it's not a straw man, it's the made-up evidence fallacy. You're just making up the fact that it does something it doesn't do. Alright, asshole. Someone read his comment. You are forgetting, I might as well, that the model Lewin presented is an approximation. So you didn't pay any attention really to the argument being made. Right? Yeah. I wasn't arguing with Lewin's. Okay, I was arguing with the guy at Yale. He's the guy who's talking about the single point sources. Lewin does Huygens in both experiments. So I'm not arguing with Lewin. I'm arguing with the guy at Yale in terms of claiming in the double slit they're single point sources. So that's not even, you can't even get the argument right. Lewin's the guy who says it's not diffraction, asshole. That's what I used Lewin to point out. Lewin also doesn't do the math that creates the math for this pattern. Okay, he does the math at just, double slit, traditional double slit. That doesn't mean the more complicated math doesn't exist. Well, again, I'm not arguing it doesn't exist. The fundamental argument is this is supposed to be nail in the coffin evidence. This is supposed to be brilliant evidence. This is supposed to be so great evidence. Great, great, great. And I'm just saying, then how come your physicists can't honestly describe it? So how come they're taking shortcuts? And shortcuts that are catastrophically inaccurate. I mean, they're just not accurate. To call it a single point source is just bullshit. The slits are pretty wide. They're just as wide as they are in the single slit. It's not a single point source. It's not a reasonable approximation. And they're only doing it because they have to. Because if they don't do it that way, they'll have 4 point sources. If they do the math the same way they do it in a single slit, they'll end up with 4 waves interfering with each other. And you want that. Doesn't exist. Well, again, that's not my claim, asshole. I'm not claiming they can't contrive. Like I said, certainly I could do it. I mean, we know what the basic idea is. So I could do this math and get this wave pattern, and then I know it's going to fall inside the single slit pattern. So I could just create a second formula to subtract from the first. And I'll get the same result, to create these nulls in here. These are the real key thing. These are darks here. These are dark bands. And this is what the math doesn't account for. These are triple darks. You could call these 3x darks. Big, giant dark bands in the middle of your pattern. And that's what they don't account for. But certainly you could create mathematics, a second formula, and just subtract from the results of your first one. But again, that's just contriving. That formula isn't predicting. That formula is designed based on what you know the results to be. You're just creating math to create your results. Very different than making predictions. Alright. You've had the more complicated math pointed out many times. Well, you can keep saying I have, and I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any model that says this is the pattern, this is what it looks like, this is what the math comes up with. All I've seen is these silly derivations that end up with something like d squared sine theta xy equals 1, or some kind of crap like that. Why don't you actually do the math? Do a prediction and predict how many bars are inside this. Tell me exactly how many bars are going to be inside this middle pattern. Go ahead. Tell me at what wavelength light, and you tell me how many bars are going to be with a slit of a single, slits of a certain thickness and a middle impediment of a certain thickness. And show me the math that does that. Asshole. The full model predicts both interference and diffraction. So again, I can only argue that Professor Lewin at MIT states emphatically there's no diffraction. There's interference. There's no such thing. Diffraction has nothing to do with the on-off pattern. If the slit widths are small enough, well again, the argument is they're plenty big enough. We can make them any size. And the argument is the math basically says you're still going to get the pattern if I make them 5 feet. I can make the slits 5 feet wide. No problem. I'm still going to get a pattern from the single impediment. The diffraction pattern is much smaller than the interference pattern. So again, he's still going to argue that this is a diffraction pattern, the envelope, and that this is the interference pattern. But the truth is, if you do the single slit experiment, as you spread this pattern out, I mean you bring it in, this turns into the bars. Lots of bars. Single slit has lots. I did it the other day, 40 bars. 40. Okay, it's little lines. Just have to make the slit wide enough. Lots of little lines. There's nothing diffraction in here. Is much smaller than the interference pattern, and that's why the approximate formula is good enough for most purposes. Well, again, it's really not good enough, and you're not dealing with the fact that, you know, it's significant that these two patterns are blended into each other. They're manifestly inside of each other. There's a dark spot here. It's not a little bit light, it's a dark. A full dark. The two patterns are blended. The two interference patterns are blended. The single slit interference and the double slit interference. It's two patterns blended. Anyway, that's why it's good enough for most purposes. Well, again, for nail-in-the-coffin evidence, I don't think you should be using approximations that don't approximate the reality at all. But the full version exists. Okay, says you. Again, another assertion. And if you want to argue that the interference is actually just Newton's rings, well, it certainly is in the single slit. The single slit experiment is just Newton's rings. I mean, you can pretend it's something else, but that's all the fuck it is. All you've done is taken a circular, you know, a bullseye pattern, and all you're really doing is cutting it. And then calling this a dark, this a light, this a dark, this a light. It's the same pattern. It's exactly Newton's, just cut. You just cut off this extra bit. But that's all the single slit pattern is. It's Newton's rings. You just narrowed what part you're viewing. You've just cut it. It's Newton's rings made linear. You've taken the circle out of it. How is it anything different than that? Why don't you demonstrate how it's different than that? How that isn't the truth. That you're just taking a cross-section of a Newton's ring. You know what a cross-section is? Well, that's all it is. The single slit experiment is just a cross-section of Newton's rings. Do you have a counter-argument? That's not the truth. Let's see. Newton's rings, you could test this very easily. I don't need to. The math is the same. Just make a double slit pattern and cover one of the slits. So again, his argument is that somehow if I cover one of the slits, I'm going to not have a pattern. And of course I'm going to. If you're correct that the interference is actually the exact same thing, you'd see in the single slit case, you should see the same pattern regardless. The same pattern is what? The double slit and the single slit are two different patterns because there's two projections. There's two projectors. So I don't know how exactly. There's 2 point sources, and there's only one point source in the other one. There's only one thing creating pattern, and there's two in the other thing. And again, how does what's your argument? I'm not claiming there's no pattern. That's how they describe it. That's how your physicists describe it, as there being no pattern. I'm claiming there will be a pattern from the single slit. You cover one slit, you'll still have a pattern from the single slit. If you're correct, the interference is actually the exact same thing you'll see with the single slit case. Exactly. Yes, exactly. You should see the same pattern regardless. I don't know what regardless means. If you're superimposing two patterns, that is, you have two slits next to each other, my argument is that they're influencing each other electrically. So you're changing how the electrons are distributed through the materials. When you bring two slits close to each other and make that thin impediment in between, it's like charges. If I move charged plates, if I took charged plates and did the same thing, you'd understand how the charge changes on the thing in the middle. So if I bring plates together, I change the voltage in those two slits. And I make the slits wider, I change the voltage. The voltage changes. The potential changes. So I'm arguing you can't bring two slits next to each other without them affecting each other. But if one of them is blocked and no light can go through it, it's a good question. Materially, what matter is, when is it energized by the photons? Do the photons make the charge relevant, or where the electrons are? I don't think so. But it's a valid question as to the density of the matter. So it might relate to the fact that he gets different results when he blocks some portion, because maybe he's changing the charge field. So the more you move matter, so the trick would be is to move something material before the light gets to the slit. So that's an experiment I'll play with. So your laser beam is a nice narrow beam, which makes it easier to do. So yeah, move matter, pieces of matter close to the slits, and see if that changes the pattern. Maybe worth trying anyway. Alright, so anyway, regardless, the same pattern regardless doesn't make any sense. But of course you won't test this, just like you won't test anything. So more assertions by you. So these claims that I won't test something, I have to be able to get a pattern first, the good one. I guess you don't understand how, if you're going to bother doing something, you ought to do it right. Well, I've done lots of single slit experiments. I used razor blades, used lots of different things, and the patterns sucked. Okay, there wasn't nice clear bars, none of that stuff. So until I get my instrumentality to cooperate, yeah, you're going to have to wait. Because I'm not going to publish crappy results, idiot. Cunt. Liar. Slandering, useless liar. One of the reasons we know affinity is more than just useful construct is because of the remarkable precision with which we have been able to test Lorentz invariance. So again, he's saying he has tested Lorentz in any kind of realistic way, when we can't make anything go near these speeds and measure anything relevant to stuff moving that fast. But he just claims it. They still can't figure out how heavy an electron actually is, and he's claiming they've done these speed tests on, these particles. Bullshit. As far as evidence shows, space-time is continuous. I don't even know what that means. What does that mean? Space-time is continuous. Oh, you mean the the fake perception goes forever? Because that's all we're really talking about is perceptions, not actualities. I mean, all the thought experiments relevant to this are all based on points of view. It's not really who gives a shit about what's continuous. We know the points of view see things differently. And we know only one thing happened, jackass. We certainly know that space does not consist of little chunks of space. Oh, it's bent, though. You know that. And who's arguing it's full of little chunks of space? I've never called them chunks of space. So, again, you want to call matter chunks of space? Well, go ahead. I've never argued that it's chunks of space. It's obviously something different than space. It's obviously something different than nothing. Something is different than nothing. I'm claiming photons are made of something. Your claim is the one that there's some kind of perturbation in a field, some kind of electromagnetic field. So two fields, an electrical field and a magnetic field. That's your argument, chunky. I bet you are fat. It is not at all. It is not at all like the pixels of a computer monitor. Again, I'm the one arguing that space is nothing, and that the stuff is flying in space is something. The stuff moving the speed of light is not nothing. It's not space. That's why I called it tons. It's because it's something, not nothing, idiot. This means space is a continuum, says you. Based on what? I mean, he says this means based on my false assumptions. The topology and continuum, whatever that even means, continua, is a non-empty, compact, connected, whatever that means, metric space. Oh, isn't that nearly perfect bullshit? So why did you get lessons from Ken Wheeler? A non-empty, compact, connected metric space. One of those pesky word games involving infinities. Yeah, whatever. I really, again, you want to think that the real physics is in declaring the non-entities to have functions. So space has functions. The nothing has functions. It tells matter what to do. The magnetic field and the electric field tell, objects whether they're magnetic or not magnetic, and they push them around with the magnetic field woo power. Calling quantum mechanics a religion because you personally find the idea repugnant. Now, I find all this dishonesty of this crooked language and these propositions based on so weak an evidence. So you're claiming an absolute truth based on not significant evidence, all right? Not great evidence. So it's like the UFO theory of people. You get a little tiny evidence, crop circles, blah, 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 and you sit there and run with it. And I'm saying you haven't got enough evidence to run with your bent space. That a photon sometimes acts like a wave and sometimes like a particle is nothing more than your personal bias. No, it's a bias against a silly idea. It's incomprehensible as a wave anyway, because every wave I've ever encountered has been in a medium under tension. So you're the one claiming there's a space ether, because there has to be something under tension. The only way something travels, a wave travels, is because the thing it's traveling through it's rubber bandy. It has to have flex. It has to be under tension. The things have to be mechanically tied to each other by some kind of force. There has to be force in there. And I'm saying you don't have any explanation, and I do. I found the tension. The tension is created by the fact that there's two polarizations of quanta, two kind, and they can be filtered. And it can create every force known to mankind. That is, it can create the strong force that exists between the electron and the proton. It can create weaker forces like gravity that are diluted but forms of the same thing, and explains magnetism. So all of them are describable just by creating two kinds of quanta and just changing and just giving them two qualitative different, just A and B, X and Z, whatever you want to call them, black and white. Something that simple. And then once you create mechanisms that can filter for that simple, you create your own off patterns. Asshole. Alright. Word games involving infinity. So again, I'll reassert my claim that nothing meaningful will ever be connected to your theory of double infinity. It's silly math. It's a waste of time. It's a math game. And again, you can play silly games with these silly words. You can have people go into a courtroom and say, I promise to lie every time I'm lying or some kind of crap like that. You can have some, you can say it all backwards and stupid and convoluted, or you can just be upfront and say there'll never be a circumstance where a double infinity is relevant. Calling quantum mechanics a religion because anyway, science is supposed to eliminate personal biases out of your epistemology, ontology. And again, you're the one claiming you don't have any bias. I'm claiming the evidence is hugely weak and you're jumping on a bandwagon. You won't even admit your physics has been sloppily presented, I mean grotesquely inaccurately presented to the public, dishonestly, frankly, and you're not a religion. Well, yes you are. You're not biased. Yes, you are. You have a bias for this crap because the evidence is weak. For instance, A equals a light wave that acts just like a wave and happens to be traveling through a medium. They don't act just like a wave. They don't spread like a wave. They don't land like a wave proportionally over a great deal of distance. So it has it has nothing, it's nothing like a wave. No wave we know of. This particle wave. B, light is a particle and behaves like a particle, whatever that means. Oh, you mean it's discrete and it lands discrete. It leaves discrete, it lands discrete. It doesn't spread or any of that crap, and it just happens to have a frequency. That is, you can shoot bullets at a frequency, and maybe some idiot will call it a wave of bullets, but the bullets aren't really waving. C, light is a particle whose location is not fixed prior to measurement. So again, it's a thing, a particle, but it doesn't know where it is. It's floating around in some probability sphere of uncertainty. And you think that certain certainty is absolute, and you somehow got evidence that it's absolute. I make the counter argument that it just happens to be that the smallest thing in the universe, the thing we can't see, the thing we have no tool to measure because it's so small, we have no instrument, we can't make a measuring device because it's too damn small, we can't cut the little lines in the ruler because we have nothing small enough to cut the lines in the ruler. And just coincidentally, the one thing in the universe that's the smallest thing in the universe and we can't look at just happens to be the one thing in the universe doing this I don't know where I am bullshit. Everything else in the universe knows where it is, except no, not this thing. And that doesn't sound conveniently, you know, fuck you, so convenient. But instead follow a probability distribution that matches the way waves propagate. Again, no, waves don't propagate that way. They don't. There's nothing uncertain about where waves go. There's nothing uncertain about how they spread. So there's no uncertainty about positions. So wave has nothing to do with probability. Sorry. This is your bias in the photon should either do A or do B and not C. It's not a bias. I'm saying first it's logical that the universe is simpler, not more complicated. I'd argue that whatever your infrastructure is that's creating this unknown space, it has to have some sort of rules because obviously it keeps things in containers. Photons don't go to Pluto, bounce back, and go through slits. I mean, this shit doesn't happen. But the bias is due to your heuristic conception of the world. I don't know what that even means, but fuck it. Your brain, as you would be, well, you're an idiot who thinks Donald Trump is smart, so you're an idiot. Your brain, as you would be the first to point out, is engineered by evolution to be a scheming survival mechanism. And what does that have to do with this subject? Oh, nothing. And part of that means the brain has to think fast to make decisions. There's nothing fast thinking about this. I've spent 5 years now, at least, messing with this bullshit. So fuck you. Promote survival in the long run. So again, that has nothing to do with what's taking place here, shithead. But this mode of operating is not very conducive to solving complex problems involving logic. So he puts logic, quantum physics, or the nature of abstract things like infinity. First of all, infinity isn't abstract. Okay, it's just unresolvable. You can't look at one and you can't calculate one. But there's nothing abstract about it. It's not a distortion. It's not a compilation. It's not in any way abstract in that sense. It's clearly an explicit thing mathematically. It has an explicit definition and consequence mathematically. So it's not an abstraction, in my opinion, if it exists. Quantum physics, I mean, clearly in Maxwell equations, an infinity has a strong and certain and complete effect. There's nothing abstract about its effect. These things take painstaking work to even begin understanding. Well, I've already defined my credentials here, and I don't have any obligation to sit there and keep accepting these kinds of gratuitous insults. You think you're smarter than me. You think you know better. You think you've studied more. You think you've seen, that you've interacted with more physics in your life than I have. I'm arguing, no, you haven't, and this isn't about your credentials, fuckhead. So these silly arguments that somehow I'm missing something, when you can't even acknowledge the simplest truths, which are, first, that you should be at least be willing to say physics shouldn't be mischaracterized for the sake of propaganda, that they should be honest in presenting the truth of the double slit experiment and what it represents as evidence. Anyway, why should you expect the brain to easily comprehend the nature of reality? Well, because I think the nature of reality is easy and simpler. Again, there's nothing... Go look at the universe, take a telescope and look out there, and you tell me what you think is complex about it. It's pretty damn simple chemistry. There's nothing bizarre happening out there much. So you want to pretend that it's complicated? No, it's not complicated. The big universe ain't complicated, the little universe isn't complicated. The only thing that's complicated is apparently communicating with fuckheads like you. Whenever you find yourself getting angry about difference of opinion, be on guard. You will probably find on examination that your belief is going to be fucking beyond that, what the evidence warrants. Bertrand Russell, religious kook. The real philosopher of science. A real philosopher of science. In your opinion. Not mine. So, I don't care. So, this quote means what? Oh, that's right. It doesn't mean anything. It's evidenced by what? Oh, that's right. There's no evidence that this happens all the time or any of this shit. And then he types a bunch of gibberish, and it says, James Joyce, someone who makes about as much sense as your Ton theory. So, my Ton theory doesn't make sense. For what reason? So I've been asking people to disqualify my theory by pointing out how my theory actually is disqualified. What it predicts, or what it states takes place, that makes it impossible for it to be correct. You haven't done any of that. How exactly could Tons not explain gravity? I've pointed out how it's exactly the same as Mach gravity, and I've explained to you why I get rid of the side effect that they disqualified it by. They didn't disqualify it because it doesn't explain gravity, that it doesn't exactly duplicate the inverse square law and all of the mechanics of gravity. No, it got disqualified because it creates another problem, which is it creates a thermodynamic problem. Things can't travel through the Ton field without being affected by the Tons. Well, now I've explained why they're not affected, why electrons do lose momentum, okay, and protons do lose momentum. You have to keep pushing them to keep them going. They won't just travel. You can't make them go with speed and just they keep going. You can't make an electron gun that shoots electrons 500 yards. Can't do it. And I've explained that the only things that can keep momentum or velocity are material objects. So, because of the complex force that's trapped inside of them. The